Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Life Below the Surface, the show where we talk about all things slimy, fuzzy, and all species in between. This is Josh, your host, and today we are joined by Senior Director of Mammals and Birds, Christen, to talk more about our fuzzy friends, the southern sea otter, and learn more about their unique adventure to come here to Georgia Aquarium. Welcome to the podcast, Dennis.
Thanks, Josh.
Good to see you, buddy. So a lot of you folks out there listening might remember Dennis from our TV series, The Aquarium, where he was featured quite a bit. But Dennis, if you could, for some of the folks that might not have seen that just yet, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be here at Georgia Aquarium?
Yeah, sure. Well, I am a senior director in our zoological operations department, and with a focus on our mammal and bird teams. So I look after a lot of the different animals here that fall under that category, and of course work with an amazing department, a team of animal care professionals that are specialized with the care of everything from our puffins to our penguins, beluga whales, harbor seals, Asian small-clawed otters, and sea otters.
So basically every single adorable species in the aquarium your department is responsible for.
Yeah, I have a good role here for sure. And how I came to the aquarium, I've been here almost 17 years. So I've been here almost since the beginning of Georgia Aquarium, or since the opening of Georgia Aquarium. I was recruited to Georgia Aquarium. I was working at a small marine research, education, and public aquarium in Alaska, actually. So recruited from Alaska to Georgia. You couldn't almost get further apart in the United States, and made the journey here in 2006. And initially, my role was one of the assistant managers in our zoological operations team, and I was responsible for the entire cold water quest gallery. So everything from a spider crab to a California sea lion and a beluga whale, and all species in between. And that was a very unique role. At that time, the aquarium animal care group was kind of organized a little bit differently than it is now. Right now, I'm responsible for mammals and birds, and we have directors that are responsible for fish and inverts, and it's kind of broken up by taxon. It's broken up by animal groups. Mm-hmm. Whereas back then it was broken up by, or divided, organized by gallery. So you had specialists that, I had aquarists that reported to me that had a lot of experience with cold water fishes. And then I had specialists that had a lot of penguin experience, blue whale experience, things like that.
Very cool, very cool. So, kind of during that time, and I honestly, when I visited as a guest, it wasn't until 2010, which is well before I actually started here. Have southern sea otters always been a part of our animal population here?
Yes, yeah. Southern sea otters were some of the first mammals that arrived at Georgia Aquarium. And we had our first two animals were very special animals, Oz and Gracie. They're no longer with us, but they lived very, very long lives here at Georgia Aquarium, and they're a very special part of our southern sea otter history.
Right, and we'll get into Oz and Gracie in just a little bit, but I think we're kind of at a good point in our discussion too, because I'm very curious. There are different types of sea otters, correct?
Yes, yeah, there are a few different subspecies of sea otters. The sea otters that we have at Georgia Aquarium are southern sea otters, which inhabit the central coast of California. It's a very threatened subspecies. It's listed on the U.S. Endangered Species Act as threatened. There's not very many of them, and they're very vulnerable. And then there are sea otters that inhabit the waters of Washington State through British Columbia into Alaska. Those are the northern sea otters, and then there's another subspecies that's kind of more on through the Aleutians down into the waters off of Asia.
Understood. It's interesting because in my job here at the aquarium, one of my one of the roles that I play is finding the proper photos and content that go on our interactives, that go on our interpretive graphics and our educational elements that guests can experience as they walk through the Cold Water Quest Gallery. And just last year, finishing up a project with the sea otters, what I found very interesting was how difficult it was for finding stock photos or things like that, like finding wild photos that were labeled properly.
Yeah.
So if one of our listeners out there is trying to distinguish the difference between them, are there any physiological things? Is there any way when you're looking at a photo you can be like, that's a southern sea otter, or that's one of the northern ecotypes? Is there a way to kind of tell them apart? Because I had to learn kind of on the fly for last year's cold water project.
There's a couple of things. It's very difficult just looking at a sea otter if it's a sea otter just laying on the surface of the water, unless there's some sort of scale. Northern sea otters are generally quite a bit larger than southern sea otters. So if you see an adult southern sea otter is going to be substantially smaller than a northern, but also just kind of looking at what the environment is. And so if you see a sea otter that's wrapping itself in a certain species of kelp, there's a lot of different types of kelp that would inhabit or you would find in different parts of their range.
Gotcha. Yeah, so if you're taking a cruise from San Francisco to Alaska, the otters that you see when you leave San Francisco are going to look a little bit different than the ones when you reach Alaska.
Yeah, if you see an otter in San Francisco, that's going to be pretty awesome.
Nice.
You probably see them a little bit further south.
A little bit further south.
But
Fair enough.
ideally, in their original range, and there's a desire to see sea otters again, southern sea otters in the San Francisco Bay Area. So yeah,
Gotcha.
Hopefully within our careers, we'll see that someday.
Yeah, well, I knew that. That was my segue into that little conservation tidbit there. So
there you go.
No, I'm lying. I had no idea, but that's okay. So with that being said, with the desire to bring them back, and then we'll kind of lead into kind of our role here at the aquarium. What role does this species play in their environment? Why are they so important? And you had mentioned kelp, which is, I know, a big kind of hot button conservation topic right now. Can you just kind of go into a little bit about the role that sea otters play and how actually this weird plant, that everyone knows kelp, but they don't know what kelp actually does or why otters are so much a part of that, of kelp's story?
Yeah. Well, the sea otters have a very fascinating history when you go back within the last century even. These are animals that have experienced quite a bit in terms of hunting pressure over the last couple of centuries. There was a fur trade. They are an animal that has the most dense fur of any mammal, and that luxurious fur came at a cost. And they were hunted throughout their range, and in many areas were extirpated, were essentially extinct from that region of the coast. And once that happened, it was pretty interesting in that it changed the balance of those ecosystems. So they inhabit very inshore rocky coasts along the Pacific, and they are predators of a lot of different invertebrates. They eat a lot of clams, abalone, sea urchins, things that like to graze. And when you take a sea otter out of that environment, you see an abundance of those grazers, and they essentially take out large swaths of what would have normally been a kelp forest. Kelp forests are fascinating ecosystems. They're a hotbed of diversity and almost like a little nursery of sorts for different fishes, different fish species. And so when you take sea otters out of that, you see an abundance of mostly sea urchins that kind of overpopulate and they graze out the kelp. Another aspect of kelp is it kind of helps with dampening wave action, and so you see a lot, when you remove the kelp, you see a lot of, you see a strong drop in the diversity of animals that inhabit those areas, and then also a lot more wave action and erosion of coastlines. So sea otters are really important to that marine ecosystem, that coastal ecosystem, and so when sea otters started kind of coming back, knocking back some of those grazer inverts, we saw kind of a return to those more natural kelp forest kind of ecosystems and returns of fish populations and things that were really good for the environment.
Sure, and this is kind of it's funny, this is kind of a shameless plug in a way, but one of my favorite things about the cold water project that I was a part of last year was that we created an interactive. Basically, it's very similar to kind of like Fruit Ninja, something like that, where you get to be the otter,
yeah.
And your role is taking out the urchins to save the kelp forest. Yeah. It was a really fun thing to be a part of and kind of work on that. So if you guys...
I see you out there playing with it every morning, so I know you're very proud of it.
I do really enjoy that game, and I'm pretty sure I have the highest score. Yeah. So, and whoever does have the highest score, I will come back tomorrow and beat it. Don't worry. Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. So you guys are, if you're walking through, it's right by the sea otter habitat. You can kind of play with a cool interactive to learn about everything that Dennis just mentioned there. So, all right. So you've talked about their role in the ecosystem and how important their conservation is and their return to their natural environment out there and kind of repopulating that southern sea otter coastline. So what role do our sea otters here at Georgia Aquarium play in that whole conservation story?
Well, a large part of conservation, Josh, is really getting the message out that there is something to be concerned about or to even be worth conserving. Sea otters play a huge role in that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, they are very charismatic. It's hard not to see a sea otter and just want to fall in love. It's one of those exhibits that have throughout my career found fascinating. I've worked with sea otters my entire almost 33 years, and it's been fascinating to me the entire time that it is the one type of animal that you can see guests walk up to, and the animals might not be doing anything but sleeping, and guests are just infatuated. They'll stay there for 20 minutes sometimes just watching an animal sleep, and you don't really see that with too many other animal exhibits. And so it's kind of a benefit in a way that you have this animal that is such a key part of the marine ecosystem that has had a very tumultuous history, and there are populations that are still very vulnerable. And so from a conservation status, the impact that Georgia Aquarium has with the popularity of this as an institution, the mission that we have to better understand and conserve these types of animals is very important and powerful to get the message out that these are animals that, yes, they're cute, yes, they're fascinating, but they actually have a very important conservation story to be told. And Georgia Aquarium is a very important part of telling that story.
That's awesome. So with all that being said, and you even said, kind of the history of the southern sea otter and things like that, let's take a little trip back in time here. Let's go back 17 years. And can you kind of tell us, you had mentioned Oz and Gracie earlier. Yeah. Can you kind of take us through kind of the timeline of southern sea otters here at Georgia Aquarium? And, I'm sure some of our listeners are quite attached to some of them. Some of these sea otters actually have their own fan pages and things like that. So just kind of tell us about the history of sea otters here at Georgia Aquarium and how some of them or all of them got here.
Well, we have been very fortunate here at Georgia Aquarium and within my department to be able to care for some amazing animals. Obviously, we care about these animals as a species and want to conserve them, but when we have the opportunity to work with individual animals like these sea otters, it is a very powerful and impactful role to play. And we've been blessed, for lack of a better word, to have some amazing, long-lived sea otters within our population here. In 2005, we brought 2 southern sea otters from California that were living at another aquarium out west, and transported them here to Atlanta. And the city fell in love with Oz and Gracie, and they lived far beyond their average life expectancy, and lived very, very good lives here, and really served as strong ambassadors for opening the eyes of a lot of people, millions and millions of guests that had come through the aquarium during those years. In 2010, we were working with our colleagues out at the Monterey Bay Aquarium that has a sea otter research and conservation program, very strong. Monterey Bay's program is internationally recognized, and they are one of the few facilities, at that time the only facility that had what we call a surrogate program. The journey or the evolution of rescue and rehabilitation of sea otters has been quite interesting. These are animals that spend upwards of almost a year with their moms after they're born. They're very, very dependent and require a lot of coaching, mentoring. They learn their foraging skills from their mom. Unlike some other species, like a lot of harbor seals or a lot of phosid seals, have very brief maternal investment periods where they're with their moms for sometimes only, with some species, only days, if not a week. And like for harbor seals that we have here at Georgia Aquarium, usually 3 to 4 weeks before they're weaned. They have a lot of innate kind of skills that once the moms kind of wean them, they just go off on their own and survive. Sea otters don't do that very well, and it took a lot of trial and error to kind of figure that out. And for the most part, if you don't have an ability to really provide that maternal care for the pups that are rescued, it's very difficult to reintegrate them back successfully into the wild. And the Monterey Bay team, since the mid-'80s, has been trying this in various forms, and they've gone, where they had animal care staff that were, pretty much just totally invested in trying to do everything possible to play the part of a sea otter mom and teach these pups everything they would need to know to be able to forage and how to find food and how to break it open, and they tried a number of times to rehabilitate animals like that and release them back into the wild, and had very little success doing that. And so for a long time, if there was a stranded sea otter pup, it was pretty much deemed non-releasable by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service pretty quickly. And then and then provided a home was available at an accredited institution, an aquarium or a zoo, that animal would be moved into that sort of public display type realm. But what the folks at Monterey Bay Aquarium started doing was taking some of their older females in their exhibit, their exhibit population, and essentially using them as surrogate moms for these stranded pups, where they would provide one of their older females with a newly stranded pup, see if the female would take it under her wing, for lack of a better word, and start raising the pup. And that became a very successful program. To this day, it's very successful, and it's starting to branch out into some other partner facilities that we hopefully will be working with in the future on that as well. But the limiting factor is the number of females that can serve as surrogates, because there's only a handful of them. It takes a long time, and there have been years where there's more pups stranding or being either abandoned, or in the case of some of the animals that we've brought here to Georgia Aquarium, their mothers were preyed upon by white sharks and therefore abandoned. And so if there's not enough surrogates in the program, then those animals are deemed non-releasable, and an effort is made to try and place them into aquariums and zoos.
So you mentioned that about them being orphaned and things like that. Are the sea otters that guests can come see now? Mm-hmm. Are there any interesting kind of rescue stories from our current population?
Yeah, I think they all sort of have interesting rescue stories. We have currently at the aquarium, we have 5 sea otters, southern sea otters. 3 of them were brought here in 2010, so they're 12 years old, and we have a pair of 3-year-olds. That if you did watch our series, The Aquarium, you saw the backstory of Gibson and Mara and their journey to Georgia Aquarium. When we go back to our 12-year-olds, we have Cruz, who was he was just a couple of weeks old, actually. Actually, I'll back up if I could. If you go back to our 12-year-olds, we have Brighton, we have Bixby, and we have Cruz. Brighton was a young female that looked like she was prematurely weaned for some reason or another. She was several months old when she stranded, and she was very sick with essentially inflammation of her digestive tract based on the fact that she was dealing with a very significant parasite load. The treatment for that, and given her age and the fact that to clear her of those parasites was going to take almost upwards of a year of treatment, she was deemed non-releasable at that point. And so she's an animal that we put our hands up. We were at that point interested in adding more sea otters to our population here in Atlanta, and she was made available to us by the agency that oversees the sea otter regulations. And so she's an animal that that was able to bring here with the help of the folks at Monterey and some friends that we had at the University of California in Santa Cruz. And we moved her here on a cargo flight, and it was a neat experience. Also that same year, there was a young female that was about 4 weeks old or so when she was abandoned. She was found pretty much by kayakers on the water. Their sea otter pups, when they're very young, have a very unique vocalization. They scream, and it's hard to miss. Makes your ears bleed sometimes. Just kidding. But it's and so she was found next to remains of her mom that had been preyed upon by a white shark. And so she was brought to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. There was not a surrogate available, but the Monterey folks knew that we had space here at Georgia Aquarium to welcome not only Brighton, but another female as well. Part of that arrangement with Monterey was once we knew they had a pup, we would deploy or send staff out to be of assistance to that team to make sure that the burden or the workload of taking care of a sea otter is very significant, and to kind of lay that onto that stranding team there. We wouldn't want that effort to kind of detract from the care of the animals that they also have, and so we sent a number of staff out there to help with that process.
So staff that lived here in Atlanta that worked at the aquarium were able to actually go out into the field basically, and with Monterey Bay Aquarium's assistance, of course, they were able to actually help care for these animals. So an Atlanta-based organization, we were able to send people to the coast of California to help with these guys.
Yes, yeah.
It's really cool.
For several weeks. And while we had staff out there, there was another very similar case, another white shark preyed upon female that was taken out and essentially abandoned a very young, it was about 2 weeks old, and that was Cruz. The issue that we had at that time was there was not really any more room at the inn, for a lack of a better way of expressing that. The Monterey folks work with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. They have a group that specializes on kind of knowing everything there is to know about sea otters and which facilities might have space to accept, not only space, but also expertise to accept very young sea otter pups. And when Cruz was recovered, there were really no more opportunities to place him, and so he was when the stranding folks get to that situation, their only choice at that point is humane euthanasia. If there's not a space in the surrogacy program, and there's not a space at an accredited facility, then the most humane thing to do at that point is to put that pup down, unfortunately, which makes, it's hard to wrap your mind around that. This is a threatened species. Why could you do that? But it is the most responsible thing to do. We had staff out there caring for Bixby at the time, and I got a phone call late. It's like they just came up. There's another young pup. It's a male. Male sea otters are a little bit more. They take a little bit more ingenuity, I guess, and they're a bit more of a challenge to manage sometimes. And so we have to be careful with the dynamic that we have in terms of the number of males and females that we would manage here with our exhibit. But we made the choice at that time that this animal was destined to be put down, to be euthanized, and we had our hands full with 2 sea otters that we were taking on already. But we made the choice to extend and do what we did there, and save that little sea otter, and brought him back with Bixby on a private plane, and never looked back. He's an amazing animal that we've learned a lot from.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, I'm not going to lie. Throughout that story you just told, I'm kind of hearing some Sarah McLachlan in the background. This kind of has that SPCA kind of commercial vibe to it. I mean, when you think about these animals, they are undeniably probably one of the most adorable species, not just here at the aquarium, but on the planet. But when you hear about how much that they're going through, you hear about habitat loss, when you hear about that, how difficult the rehab and rehabilitation, process is for them. It's a lot different than like a California sea lion that can go out into a group and basically learn from the group. So it seems like these animals have a lot kind of going against them.
Yes.
But it's really cool to know that there's actually a whole bunch of people, ourselves included, that care very much about these critters. And especially in that story just there, when the alternative was, the animal not being here anymore, that the decision was made to prolong that animal's life, and now he's, a private plane to Atlanta and now living the sweet life here in the Coldwater Quest Gallery. I mean, that's very much a positive. So what can our listeners, with all of that being said, what is one positive impact that our listeners and our visitors can have on southern sea otters? Well, what is one or a couple things that can kind of help this species out that any person can do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Josh, and that's something that's really a powerful message for us when we have these sea otters here in Atlanta. They are visible to millions of guests every year, and they are, as I've said, a very powerful conservation kind of case. And the message is very simple, and it's something that you hear a lot. Everybody has a role to play. Our goal here is to inspire people to care about these animals. We obviously care about them. We want to do everything possible to make sure that these are animals that live for generations, without impact based on our activities. But the honest truth is, our activities have an impact on these animals. And with the case of the southern sea otter, there's a number of things. Unfortunately, these are animals that are succumbing or being exposed more and more to runoff related to agricultural runoff, but also, curiously, they're very susceptible to a parasite called toxoplasmosis. If you might know of it through, it's one of the reasons that if you're an expectant mother, you're not supposed to change or tend to your cat's litter box. It's a parasite that is transmissible through cat feces, and so what we're seeing is sea otters are coming up with this toxoplasmosis, they're exposed to this toxoplasma, and that's having an issue on them. It creates a lot of neurological issues for them. They're not equipped to handle it, and so we're seeing issues with people poorly or improperly disposing of their pet waste. Essentially, it's creating an issue for them. Probably related somewhat to just the population that exists along that same coastline, the number of cats, the number of pets, feral or otherwise, and so that's an issue. But also marine debris. These are animals that are very curious, and they're actually one of the few species actually that use tools to help their efforts in getting into the hard-shelled invertebrates that they eat. They'll go down and bring up a clam, but also bring up a rock and smash the clam against a rock. But they use other things, and they're very curious in their environment. And so when people are using a lot of single-use plastic bags, those tend to unfortunately end up in the ocean. And these are animals that there's animals that are photographed with bags on their head, essentially not surviving that sort of interaction with marine debris. And so just being careful of what we're utilizing in our day-to-day lives, trying to take every effort to use things that are more sustainable and are less likely to end up in the ocean and end up being an issue for these animals and the other animals that live in the marine environment.
So basically, if you live in California or are visiting the coast of California, just pick up after yourself and pick up after your pet, and that can actually make a world of difference to these animals.
But also, again, everybody has a role to play. Every stream leads to the ocean, and so even though we're hundreds of miles away from the ocean, guests or residents of Atlanta have a role to play too, because it's not just the sea otter; it's the sea turtle. It's whales that are washing up with stomachs full of single-use plastics. Sea turtles that are washing up with straws up their nose and things like that. So lots of decisions that people have to make in their day-to-day lives, but understanding that, just cutting back helps. It makes a big difference.
Right. All good. Very, very, very good points there. So, Dennis, thank you very much. I've learned way more about these animals than I've worked here for almost 7 years now, and I learned a lot today about these incredible critters. So before you go, you do, as we mentioned in the very beginning, you do care for all of the adorable critters here at the aquarium. Out of all of them, all those species, and honestly, it might be the sea otter, but what's your favorite? Putting you on the spot. What is your favorite?
It's like you don't have a favorite child, you can't answer. Well,
yeah, but you kind of do.
You got to do. Honest answer is it probably depends on the day. I find
just like a child.
Just like a child. It depends on what's going on. Right now, to be honest with you, as I'm sitting here, we have 5 little pufflings that have been hatched over the last couple weeks, and I'd say I'm kind of infatuated with watching my phone and our little nest cams, watching these little puffballs grow so quickly. So I'm definitely into that. Sea otters are always a favorite. Anybody that maybe watched the show or knows me knows that I'm a fan of our harbor seals, and Rose, our little female specifically, is one that always gets me. I spend time every day saying hi to her for sure.
She is adorable.
She's adorable, yeah. So didn't really answer your question.
It's okay. Nobody really has, because everyone's trying to, yeah. We have a lot of incredible animals here, and it's really hard to.
One of the favorite animals I've ever worked with is helping the OV team with the manta rays behind us here. They're all very, very. They get to me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this is a very special place, and obviously over 17 years, you've been a huge part of this aquarium's history, and you've dedicated your life in the past 17 years of your life to these incredible animals, while having a family. You have your own kids and things like that you're caring for. So you're taking care of. I just learned that puffling is a word, unless you made that up.
Nope.
That is the actual scientific term, puffling.
Baby puffin. A puffin chick is a puffling.
It's
the cutest thing on the planet.
Pretty sure you got that from Harry Potter, but that's fine.
Nope.
So with all of that, with 17 years of history at this facility, I'm going to put you on the spot again. What's your favorite memory of this place?
My favorite memory?
Yeah. Favorite experience? Favorite?
Oh, man,
just what?
Flooding.
Yeah.
Flooding.
There was a flood?
No, just the memories are flooding.
Oh, okay, good. I was going to say, well, that would be memorable.
Honestly, actually, some of these transports, being able to go out in the field and be able to, work with these animals and bring them back here, and the planning and all the expertise, and just takes a lot to pull that off. And being in the role that I am, where that's my responsibility. It's to see that kind of happen, and the animals come here and they make it into the habitats, and seeing them thrive is all the memories kind of flood back to those moments. So with respect to maybe the last sea otter transport was probably one of them, and it was nice to get sea otters to Atlanta from California. You have to there's a lot that goes into moving them. They have to stay cold. We've learned that the best way is just to charter a private plane. So it sounds a little bougie, I guess, but it's for their own best interest. We can get a sea otter pup here in a couple of hours from the coast of California, which is what they need. And so the last time when we were moving Gibson and Mara, it was a beautiful plane. I felt kind of bad because we were moving all these wet things and chests of ice on this plane that once we were in the air, I learned the charter before us, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but it was Bruno Mars was taken to Hawaii in that same plane. So just a little bit of.
So it was Bruno Mars's plane, and it wasn't Taylor Swift's?
No.
Okay.
It was Bruno's
Yeah.
plane. Yeah.
Nice. Because in a previous episode, we talked to Andy from the Sea Lion team, but I remember from all the old footage, you were a part of those guys coming here. So as the listeners know, I started my career at Georgia Aquarium here in Atlanta with our Sea Lion team.
Yes,
so all the little guys that I cared for when I first started back in 2016 here were all animals that literally you had just brought from California months before.
Yeah. Yeah, we could sit here for a couple hours just talking about animal transports and things like that. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, Neptune and Jupiter were animals that I brought back. I remember seeing Andy at the facility where those animals were being housed at the time. He was there, so he's in the same footage in a different role. But yeah.
Very cool.
Great.
Well, I mean, I think we have a reason for you to come back. I think that we could have a part 2 to talk all about transports. You've done great today. So, Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, thank you all for listening in. We'll see you next time.